ABCD grades away. They're taking kindergarten 1, 2, 3 through 12 away. And the whole thing is an open system where the child proceeds at his own pace and has his own test. He's not being compared against anybody else, no competition. Because he is the cog in the wheel. He's being trained for the state and the corporations, not for his own upward mobility. Forget classical education. That's what they're putting in right now. They're calling it Reinventing Schools Coalition. And interestingly enough, why I should be living in this small town of Dresden, Maine, where it's one of the pilots, one of the few in the country for it. I went over and I found out about it. Their whole goal was to turn education on its head into training, which is exactly what they want to do, because if you take the Carnegie's little conclusions and recommendations for the social studies, forget social studies, okay, I don't know why they call it that really. It was really conclusions and recommendations for the destruction of American education, that little book. By putting that new system in, and the very people who signed off on their report were involved in all of this at Columbia. George Counts, Rudd, Balu, all the names. And so Carnegie, whereas you had Hopkins and University of Chicago and all were putting in the method, Carnegie was advocating the change of our formerly free market system to a planned economy, Soviet style, through the schools. That's the little dark blue book, Conclusions and Recommendations. That is recommending a new form of government and economic system for the United States, and it clearly states in there the American people are going to have to get used to this, because this is the new order. These barriers are breaking down all over the world. We've got to have a world system and all. This is all, I mean, this isn't direct quotes, but this is what the book tells you. And that the curriculum has to be completely revised from the old classical curriculum to focus on world government, basically. That's that little 1934 book. So at the same time, you had Columbia University and Dewey and all of them. Dewey, a lot of them had been to the Soviet Union, George Counts, and they were just saying, this is the most wonderful system, blah, blah, blah. Well, I think Counts recounted or recanted sort of at the end, I think he realized, because things were getting pretty brutal in the 30s under Stalin. It was pretty hard to defend the system. But anyway, the goal, I think, people will always ask, well, why on earth did Wall Street finance the Bolshevik Revolution? Why would they do that? Well, I think they did it because Russia was I don't think they did it because they were atheists or one thing or the other. I mean, William Boyce Thompson, he was first head of the Federal Reserve, I think. He put $100,000 of his own money into Russia. I think it was all greed, personally. I think that's why they initially started supporting the Bolshevik Revolution. I think they wanted to be in control of the natural resources. I'm talking about America's Secret Establishment by Anthony Sutton. I knew Anthony Sutton. We met. We both were working on U.S. Soviet policy. I used to be in the State Department, so I was interested in that too. But one day, he said, I'm interested in the influence of the order at Yale, and I said, oh, you are? And interesting enough, I had just the day before received the copies of the membership in 3 or 4 little books. They're actually, we can take pictures of them if you want. I have them. And he said, you have the membership list? And I said, yes. And he asked me to send it to him, and I did. He promised he'd get them back, which he did. And he told me, he said, Charlotte, I've been doing research for the Hoover Institute for several years on U.S. aid to the Soviet Union and wondering, what on earth are we doing? Why are we building up our enemy? I just couldn't understand it. And he said, when I put all those names on the membership list that you had out on the dining room table, all of a sudden everything made sense. I saw the names of these very important people who were all involved in the defense contracts, who were involved in education going way back, everything. I saw what they were doing. And that was when he became, you know, even, he really started focusing. And he wrote the book after he got the list. And I've always really liked that. This is a really good quote here that I like to use, because not just because the fellow that he's quoting was a friend of my father's, sort of interesting, but because it tells you exactly how important the Order of Skull and Bones at Yale is. People say, oh, it's a little boys club, and they ignore it. They ignore the fact that John Kerry and George Bush were both running for president. You know, they didn't, I mean, isn't this sort of weird that out of an organization that has a maximum, I don't know how many, maybe 12,000 members that, or less, you know, since its creation, I don't know how many there are, that we would end up in a country of, what, how many million are we? Having two people running for president who are out of Yale, the Order of Skull and Bones? I mean, that just doesn't make sense. So anyway, this is a quote that he has. This is from F.O. Matheson, who was Skull and Bones, 1923. My father was too. To Donald Ogden Stewart, Skull and Bones, 1916, an older guy. In regard to Matheson, they called him Matty, Matty's upcoming appearance before the House Committee on Un-American Activities. So he's writing to his other Skull and Bones buddy, you know, soothing his concerns and saying, don't worry, we'll make it. We're going to get by here. You know, we're going to get our agenda in, basically. So Matheson says, quote, as long as we have somebody from Bones, himself, right, who can bring pressure on the committee, I should think we'll be all right. So that's a very important quote. Now, Sutton goes on here, and he says, for over 170 years, these people have met in secret. From out of their initiates come presidents, senators, judges, cabinet secretaries, and plenty of spooks, CIA. They are titans of finance and industry, and they have just recently installed a third Skull and Bones president of the United States, George Jr., right? George W. Bush's secret name is temporary. His father, George H.W. Bush's Bones name is Magog, and his grandfather, Prescott Sheldon Bush, stole for the order one of their prized possessions, Geronimo's skull. But the Order of Skull and Bones secrets have always been safe for the press, of which much they owned. They owned, and that's why I think earlier you saw in this video, I mentioned that, or maybe I didn't, I've been writing letters to the press since 1975 that, with a direct quote from a communist, that regionalism is communism. And I've had other articles published, but they would never go near that. Either they would take that quote out, because that's a quote from a communist writer for the Daily World, writing for their own journal, the Daily World. And so when you talk about the control of the press, it's complete, the major media. I don't have to tell you folks that probably, but anyway. All right, now, Skull and Bones, Bonesmen, here's a little list. Time, Life, Fortunes, Henry Luce, Newsweek's E. Roland Bunny Harriman, right? Cowles Communications, Alfred Cowles. National Review's William Buckley. Boy, he took us to the cleaners, didn't he? Atlantic Monthly's R.W. Davenport. I guess Buckley was the one that managed to get the conservatives in line, so they're supporting a planned economy and all, right? He said that he said that John Kenneth Galbraith was one of his best friends, and he admired him so.
Did he repudiate the Birchers?
Oh, yes. Yes, went after the Birchers. He did terrible things, Buckley. Atlantic Monthly's Davenport, among others. If the order is mentioned in the establishment press at all, Bones is defined as just a staid wayside for students. Its glory faded. This book is extremely important. You can go on the internet to get it. You said Alex has got it, is that right? You're right. Anthony Sutton was educated at universities of London, Göttingen, and California. While research fellow at the prestigious Hoover Institute, he produced the monumental 3-volume series, Western Technology and Soviet Economic Development. Other books include The Best Enemy Money Can Buy, Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, Wall Street and Hitler, and many others. All right, this is a picture of my grandfather, Samuel Clifton Thompson, born in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. And this picture is taken just before he went out to South Africa as a mining engineer to open up the gold mines in South Africa. I might point out that he was the first member in the family from the Order of Skull and Bonrs. You'll be seeing later, you're going to see a picture of Grandpa and my father is coming up.
Put down a little bit.
Okay.
There you go. Right there.
And he lived out there from around 1897 and was there during the Boer War, and they returned in the breakout of the First World War I. My father was born in South Africa, obviously, and my grandfather met a lovely gal from Australia. That was my grandmother, and she had come. This is a very interesting story. She had come over with her father and 12 siblings on a sailing ship from Australia to Cape Town. My great-grandfather from Australia had emigrated from England and was the clerk of the works or something in Melbourne, Australia. And they had all those children, and can you imagine? Traveling on a sailing ship back in 1895 or something with all those children. And anyway, my grandfather somehow met, we don't know how, my grandmother. And they were married in Johannesburg in 1902. And he was a member of the order at Yale, and he was very close to Sir A. Bailey and some of the Fabian socialists. I don't really know what role he had in the activities of the order, but I would imagine some, because it was pretty big time gold mining, and he was very instrumental in opening up the mines there. So that's Grandpa Thompson. Here is a picture of the same Grandpa a little bit later with my father and my sister Victoria, and that's Grandpa. He's being very grandfatherly. This is probably around 1930, this picture. And that's my dad holding on to my sister, my dad Clifton, who subsequently was tapped for the order and for his class at Yale. And with Grandpa, the one that I spoke to you about, who was the mining engineer that went from Pennsylvania to South Africa to open the gold mines in the late 1800s. This is an interesting picture here, which shows, I think that this looks like a bunch of Skull and Bones friends. I do believe. I'm going to show you the picture and then I will identify a bit for you. The one in the front row is Charles Spofford. And then we have my father. I'll explain a little bit. It's difficult to hold this up, but the one in the front row in the middle is Charles Spofford, a very close friend of my father's, and I really liked Charles Spofford a lot. He ended up being the legal counsel from Davis Polk, Wardwell, Sunderland, and Kendall for the Suez Canal Company and many, many other high positions. He rose to the top, getting all sorts of honorary medals from foreign governments in Europe and everywhere, and counsel on foreign relations, and a lawyer, and a very, very decent, nice man. He close to my father. He died about 25 years ago, I guess. Interesting man. He was born in California, I believe, and unlike the other Bones characters that were in that class, friends of my father's, he had not been to prep school, one of the fancy prep schools on the East Coast. He went to public school in California, which I do believe they must have had extremely good public schools back then, because Chuck Spofford was quite a scholar, and he was a very good musician. And very high up he became after World War II, which he served in Europe, as a lieutenant or something. After he got out, he was promoted way high up to one of the top positions in NATO, the North American Treaty Organization, and went on to be very influential in diplomatic circles. This is coming from being a boy in the public school system in California, rising to just really the highest heights imaginable. So that's Chuck. The other members that are shown there are close friends of my father's, Revel McCallum and Fred Haynes, I think. I'm not going to tell you where they all are. My father is in the picture somewhere there in the second row, I think. And Edwin Blair, who was called Mr. Yale always because he was a great fundraiser for Yale. So he was Mr. Yale. He was also the gentleman that invited my dad to go out to Bohemian Grove for 1 week or whatever it was. That it was through Edwin Blair that my father did go out there, and when he returned, you know, he wasn't terribly impressed with what was going on there. He said the food was excellent, the lectures were pretty good, everything was done very nicely, but he would never go back. So I'm making excuses for my dad because I don't think he was ever really very happy with the agenda, the Yale agenda, the Order's agenda, although he stayed close to his friends. As you can see in this picture, they're all having a very good time on someone's boat or on the dock somewhere. This is the Skull and Bonrs grandfather clock. These clocks were given to members of the order when they got married. And my father was married in 1927, I believe, and he ordered the clock from a clockmaker in South Carolina, and I think that the order pays for the clock. And it was a gift, and all of them receive a clock when they get married. I believe that's the case. And we had it in our house from the time I was born, of course, and I remember it best because it's so mellow, and I would, as a young child, you know, waiting for Santa Claus to arrive, go to bed at night, and the clock would, you know, go off at every hour, and my mom and dad, of course, were putting things under the tree and giving Santa Claus his peanut butter sandwich and banana. And I was sleeping and listening to the clock. And then finally around, 5, it would strike 5, then 6, and I'd know, well, I can get up now. And I'd run down, and Santa Claus had been there, and the sandwich had been eaten, and the clock would strike 6:30, and then everybody would have to come down and deal with me. So I just have great memories of the clock, and what the significance is with the clock. Dad used to always say, he was very firm about that. He never told us why, but don't ever let the clock wind down. Keep the clock wound sharp. And always keep it 5 minutes ahead. And what that means, maybe it means they're 5 minutes ahead of everybody. The order has to keep 5 minutes ahead of all of us. And don't let it wind down, because if you did that, they'd be getting 5 or 10 minutes behind or more. And as a member of the family, you never talk about the order. My father never discussed anything about the order of any significance, really. Although, as we said earlier on, most of his friends were very close. Very close friends were the order, and all of them, all the ushers in his wedding, were Skull and Bones, the order, and friends all the way through life. But that had nothing to do with his own personal beliefs and all. He did not. He was not involved in any major political decisions affecting our country or our schools or anything. He was a wonderful mayor of several towns, a very strict constitutionalist, which certainly doesn't go along with what the order stands for. I mean, he would really cause trouble on the board if anybody deviated from the Constitution. So that's just a little bit of a defense of a member of the order, my dad. And as you heard earlier on, you know, before he died, he did say that he would help me if he could, if he had longer a right. So hopefully there are more members who come to that conclusion, and maybe someday we won't have a problem with the order. I hope that the order doesn't continue causing all of us the problems that it's caused in the past, though, especially in education. Now, we're going to get into the books. The books were originally, they'd never published the list of members in book form before. At least that's what my father told me. One day when he was ill, this is the catalog of the membership of living members, volume 1. I think it's around 1978, the date on this. Well, that one's 1977. Let's take a look at this. Oh no, see, this is October 1983. This is what happened. And Dad, I was taking care of my father. He was dying of cancer in New Jersey, and my sister and I would rotate, go down there. We didn't want to put him in a nursing home. So one day, it was pretty close to the end of his life, the mail brought these two books in the mail, which are, one is this one, Volume 1, The Living Members, the catalog of the living members as of 1983. And this is the catalog of all the members as of May 1977. This is the living and the dead. As of May 1977. So this is really the updated one right here. Anyway, I was opening the mail because my father wasn't well. I was taking care of all the business things and mail correspondence, and these arrived. And so I took them into Dad, and he said, "God," he said, "they're getting pretty fancy up there in New Haven." You know, he said, "What are they doing? Never been in book form before." And that was his little comment. And so I said, "Well, it is, you know." So we, around that time, I was working with Anthony Sutton on something, because I was always very interested in U.S. policy towards the Soviet Union, and he had done such remarkable work, aside from his great book, which came out subsequently on the order, but his work at the Hoover Institute in regard to United States transfer of technology and all sorts of information and money, etc., to the Soviet Union from the time of the Bolshevik Revolution. And so Sutton was very highly respected in that field, and he told me, it just was a fluke, really.